Okay, well, let's get started with the Wikipedia scrape part of the project. So, you can see I added the video for installing Atom. I keep sort of changing the site as I'm making videos. I actually have the description video done too, and I need to put that up here somewhere. Or maybe down here. I think I'd probably put it down here. So we're going to do the Wikipedia part next, and right underneath this section, um, like part 1A, I guess. Should probably have it say that. I'm going to add this video. So actually, I'll go ahead and change that and make it part 1A. So you can kind of see this. I'm not going to explain too much what I'm doing at the moment. You will see, excuse me, I will walk through kind of what we're looking at here. I've got HTML on my left and CSS on my right. I prefer I prefer this sort of decoupled way of writing HTML and CSS. I'm not a fan of inline styling, it's called, so I'm writing CSS in here, or even block styling, which is like having a whole section of style up here in your HTML and writing it out. I prefer to have two separate files. It keeps it cleaner, it keeps it neater. My way of doing things, I like to have my HTML open in one window and my CSS open in one window, and I'll go back and forth. And you know, I find development, writing and building websites easier this way. So let's add h4 there, and then we're going to have to add some styling. So what we're going to do is jump over to Firefox. I'm going to refresh the page. It's my part 1A. Spacing is a little goofy, so I think what I'm going to do is mess with that a little bit. The margin top is 1 for that. I think I'm going to change that. Let's go back down. 5 rem. We'll talk about what that is here in a minute. Okay, that's okay for now. We're going to come in and change some of this. I have no part 1. Well, let's add a part 1. Where are we going to put it? It doesn't really matter. So we'll just add it down here, part 1. So that's padding on the bottom. And we'll go to this. Jump over. Yeah, that's kind of a lot, but it's fine for now. Maybe we'll do 1.5. 1.25. Whatever. That's fine for now. I'll come tweak it in a minute. So anyway, okay, what we're going to do now that I'm done tweaking the project description site, I'm just going to go ahead and close those and close my folder there. What we're going to do now is we're going to make a project, make a folder, call it WikiScrape, or Wiki, whatever you want to call it, it's fine. You just need to know where you put it. Whenever we're working with HTML projects, we always want to work with a folder. This sidebar here, like if you don't see it, you need to mouse over to the left until you see this little chevron, this little right angle or right pointing to the right chevron, right facing chevron. Click on that and it will open this. It's called a drawer, but it'll open this sort of like overview of all the files and projects you have open in Atom right now. So I made this folder, and this folder is actually, if I right click on it and I go to show on Finder, this folder is a folder on my hard drive, and I have that inside of another folder called GitHub, which is inside my documents. And that's just sort of telling me where it lives on my hard drive. Here's that project right there. Okay, obviously that's another one. So inside of here, this is just over here in Atom. It's just a picture of it, or where it actually is on the hard drive. So now there's a very certain kind of structure that we need to have for these projects. You need to have an index file, index.html file. This file is served or read by the browser without actually being written up at the top of the browser. So what I mean by that is if I put this page on the web, like right now, it lives on my hard drive, and that's what this file colon / / and then that path is just saying I'm using the browser to look at this file on my hard drive. But if I go to GitHub and I update everything here, so the project updates, click commit and push. This is just pushing it. This is saving the copies onto the internet. Now what I can do is I can go to where that the link for that website right here. So now it should have, oh, it does not reflect my changes. So it's probably going to take a minute for it to reflect those changes I just pushed. Sometimes it's faster, sometimes it's slower. Ooh, this is really slow. Let's try Safari. I already have it open. Yeah, so in Safari it was a little faster. Still not doing. There we go. Firefox. So you can see it reflects those changes. Now, because of that delay, I actually prefer to develop, or not just because of the delay, but I prefer to develop, so write the code and see what it looks like locally, which means on my machine. So we're going to be opening our files in the browser and looking at them in the browser, not live on the internet. Now this is live on the internet. Okay. All right. Where was I going with that? I don't know where I was going with that. There was something else I wanted to say, but now I've forgotten. Okay. So, oh yeah, that's what I was saying. So this index file, right? If I go back to Firefox and go to the site, notice it doesn't, in the URL up here, it doesn't actually say index.html, even though that is the file that we're looking at. That's because browsers are set to not display that index file so that we can have clean URLs. So for instance, if I go to my personal site, alexmyers.info, the actual page that I'm loading is alexmyers.info/index.html. It's the same. Like I could actually put that in there, .html, hit return, it's the exact same thing. Browsers, just for cleanliness, don't show them. So that's just a little magic behind the index.html. So it looks like you're not actually loading a page like an HTML page, but you are. It's just an index page. All right, hopefully that made sense. So we need that index page. That needs to be in the root of the folder, so it can't be inside any folders. It has to be right there at the very first level, so to speak. So we'll make one for Wikiscrape. So I'm gonna select Wikiscrape here, right-click on it, and say New File. And then I'm gonna say index.html. So notice it's saying enter a path, right? So if I wanted to, I could stick this inside of a folder. I could say pages/index.html, and that would create a folder called pages, and then the file index.html inside of that folder. But that's not what I want, okay? I just want index.html in the root of this folder. That's not inside any subfolders. Hit enter. So now I have that index.html there. Now I have index.html over here. This is just, again, this sidebar is just a view of what's going on here in the hard drive. So, okay. The other thing we need is a CSS folder. So right click on there. And actually, we're going to do file, and we're going to create the folder and the CSS file at the same time. So we'll write CSS/master.css. That will create a folder called CSS, and then a file called master.css. It knows it's a folder because there's a / after it, and it knows it's a file because there's an extension after the name. There's a dot, and then a file. This is a file type, so the type of file. All right, so now we've got a CSS folder and a file called master.css. Come back here, and it's doing it all live. All right, okay. This .git you don't need to worry about, and this license you don't need to worry about. This is stuff that GitHub, which is who I use to host my pages, to keep my pages on the internet. The stuff GitHub puts in there, so no biggie. Okay, so so we're going to ignore that for now. This is really all we need. CSS, master.css. When you churn your stuff in, you will actually turn in this folder. You will, so we'll look at it in the Finder. You will compress it. So like you would, if I was turning in Wikiscrape right now, I would right click on it, compress, and turn the zip file in. Okay, so that's what I mean when I want you to turn in a project. That's how you turn in projects. So go ahead and delete that. Okay, let's come back here. Let's get rid of this. Now, like I was saying before, my preferred method of working is with my HTML here on the left and my CSS over here on the right. How you get that, as opposed to right now, they're just on top of each other. How you get that arrangement is to grab master.css and drag it over here to the right. And you can sort of see there's like a highlighted area. That's Adam trying to figure out where you want this file to be. So I could have it take up half the horizontal space, half the vertical space. I'm sorry, half the horizontal, half the vertical. And this is how I prefer to work. Okay, well, we always start with our index to write some HTML. Because it has the extension .html, Adam knows that it's an HTML file. You can always double check that though by looking at the bottom right. It should give you this indication that there's an HTML file. This is an HTML file. So if you mouse over it, it'll say this file uses the HTML grammar. And then if I go over to my CSS, this file uses the CSS grammar. This file uses ATF8 encoding or UTF-8 encoding. This also uses Unix line endings. All this stuff is just specific kind of techie stuff. But the more important thing is just double checking that you are working with an HTML file. That's very important. Or that your file type is fine or right. So then the next thing is to sort of build the structure of our HTML file. We do this by utilizing Emmet. Okay, so Emmet gives us this little green drop down. So if you don't have Emmet installed, you won't see this. But Emmet gives us what's called a boilerplate. And the boilerplate is like a little chunk or like a little template of code that it will put into our file. And it's just stuff that you would normally have to write all the time on your own, that it has to be in every HTML file, and it's just easier to have it as something you can just like paste in there. So you write HTML, little drop down happens. HTML, hit enter, not tab, and it will give us this little bit of this little template of code here. And so let's talk about what this is. I'm going to make it a little bigger here. All right, so our document type, this is just a declaration telling the browser that the document type is HTML, just in case the browser didn't know. HTML, this first tag, remember you need to read the HTML CSS basics PDF first. But this HTML tag, right, every page of HTML, everything has to be inside of an HTML tag. So here's the open tag, here's the close tag. The language is English. I actually forget what this stands for. I can't, left to right, direction, left to right, that's right, okay. The direction, the reading and understanding is left to right. If this was Arabic or Farsi or any other language like Japanese or Chinese or anything that uses right to left, it would say RTL, and everything would be interpreted from the right to the left. All right, so then we have a section, the next section down is our head. So we have our HTML section, and then inside of that we have two things called head and body. Everything always refers to people. So the head is kind of where all the settings live. It's like where all the stuff that doesn't get shown by the browser. So the user doesn't really ever see this stuff, but it's stuff that we will need to make the page work the way we want it to work. We will link to our CSS file in here. Anything we want to show up in the tab gets written into the title. So like this, I'll call it Wikiscrape. This is the character set that we're using, which is UTF-8, which is Latin. Western Latin. So title Wikiscrape, and then we're actually going to go ahead and link to our CSS. So we'll type link, hit tab, and this href is a hypertext reference. And so we're going to write the path, the address of the CSS file. So this CSS file lives inside of a CSS folder. That CSS folder is a sibling of the index file, which means it lives at the same level. Right? This is level 1, this is level 2. The CSS folder is a sibling of the index file. So we need to say, to find that master.css, we have to write CSS folder / master.css, so file. So we're giving the address, the relative address, so the address from the position of this index.html. It's like giving directions to people, right? Like if you give a direction to the store to someone who's not, doesn't know how to get there from your house, you're giving the directions from your house. So you would say, take a right, drive down 3 blocks, take another right, drive down 6 blocks, take another right, you're there, right? So all those directions are relative directions. Right and left are relative directions. Whereas if you're giving absolute directions, you would say go north, right, for half a mile, go east for a mile, and then go south for a quarter of a mile, and then you're there. Right? Those directions are absolute directions within the frame of the Earth. Because they're still relative because they assume you're on Earth when you give those directions. If you were on the moon, it'd be different, right? But, or, this is, I'm not trying to confuse you, but I'm just, yeah, anyway, I'm not even going to go down that rabbit hole. All directions are relative. I'm just going to throw it out there. But for the sake of argument, absolute assumes a greater or broader frame of reference. So the Earth in terms of north and south and east and west. Relative assumes a smaller, more finite frame of reference. So, where you live, your house, or in this case, the file. So we're saying index.html is the starting point because that's the file we are inside of writing these directions. And then we're saying go inside the CSS folder and then load the master.css file. So that's how you're loading this CSS file into this HTML file. So you're coupling them together. Okay, we'll save it. You may have noticed, there's a little blue dot up there. So if I make a change, there's a little blue dot like that, or that X turns blue. It means I have unsaved changes. Okay. Anytime you see that, and you want to look at your file, you have to save those changes before you can look at the file, before you can load it in the browser. So I mean by look at. All right. Let's move on. There's a lot to this, so we're gonna keep going. I'm probably gonna break this up into a couple different videos. All right, so that's how we link our CSS, and then let's come down to the body. So the body is where we put everything that we want to show to the user. All right, these are the this is everything that the user is going to see. And the HTML is the structure, the skeleton of our page. So this is how we organize all the content. And then the CSS is how we make the content look good. You can do everything in HTML and have a perfectly legible, fine website. There's actually a couple of modes for doing this, for removing a lot of junk. So if we go out to a website, like this isn't terrible, the Verge isn't terrible, but there's a lot going on here, right? And for instance, if I were to unblock all the ads, there's even more going on. It's terrible, I hate it. Oh, that's a really gross ad that is messing up the design of this page. I don't even know, like, it's not even loading these images, it's loading the ads instead of loading the images. I mean, this is junk. I hate it. It's killing me. Gigantic ad. I mean, I hate that. Oh, I can't stand that off. Huh. Okay. All right, but let's come into one of these articles. So a lot of junk. There's a video. There's all this style. It's all pretty. It's okay. It's kind of fun and easy to read, but it may not look great. So a lot of modern browsers have like this reader view, and what this reader view does is it strips a lot of CSS, strips a lot of this like colorful designy stuff out, and creates a very just legible web page. It's boring, right? But it's legible. You can read it, and not get distracted by all sorts of junk that's on it. It's actually really pretty. I really don't like that curve. Oh, that's gross. Anyway. Oh. Okay, sorry. I'm like getting caught up reading about the phones. So yeah, it's browsers have this thing that just like strips a lot of the CSS to make it easy to read. So that's telling you that people find overly designed websites difficult to read, or overly stylized. I won't say design, I'll say stylized. So websites that have just tons of CSS applied to them are hard to read. So bearing that in mind, it's a good idea to try to design easy to read websites, because primarily that's the function of a website, is to convey information. They're going to be read. So with this project, we're going to take a Wikipedia page, and we are going to essentially kind of recreate this reader view. So if I come in here and I grab like the go off the source article, there's a lot of junk going on, but let's look at the reader view. It's not terribly different, but it is a little easier to read. You can see the font's a little bigger. Things are organized a little bit more. Notice it's been moved into like this column in the middle that looks to be about 75% of the total width of my page, as opposed to being stretched out completely. That's because there have been a lot of studies that show that that column, that width, is a really comfortable width for people to read. So there's a lot of psychology and perception psychology that goes into this. All right, in the next video, we're going to sit down and actually start doing this. So look for that one.